In today's show, we're jumping into Lightroom Classic to take a look at the final steps for editing our wildlife photos. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. And we are going to take a look, as I mentioned at the top of the show, at the final steps that we go through inside of Lightroom Classic when it comes to editing our wildlife photos. Now, you will recall that over the past couple of episodes, we've been going through my editing process, and that all began with taking our photos into Topaz Photo AI, where we applied our noise reduction as well as some image sharpening. And you will also recall what a great job that program does at bringing our photos to that next level. Then in the last show, we went into Lightroom and we talked about the cropping tool as well as the AI masking tools. And these are great ways to refine our composition as well as add depth, texture, and dimension to our images through those masking tools and making local adjustments, right? We were able to edit the background of the image, and then we were able to bring it to just the subject, and we were really able to start building some contrast there and really bringing focus to our subject and really making them pop from the background. So it went a long, long way at, again, bringing our photo up to yet another level. And we just keep taking these very easy steps to make our images look way better than when they come out of camera. Now, we're not doing anything that makes the photo unnatural. We're not doing anything, that's ridiculous to the images. Most of our edits here have been very straightforward, pretty easy, but this is the art of enhancing our photos for production, right? Whether it's to print the photo, whether it's to share it on social media, or whether it's for our own personal project that, we're looking to maybe create a photo book of some sort. We're just really bringing the photo to its best form, and it's looking fantastic so far. So let's jump in and take a look at some of those steps that we go through inside of Lightroom Classic after the cropping tool and after the masking tool. Now, you will find that when we are done with the masking tools inside of Lightroom, we're going to come back out and we're going to kind of evaluate what we have going on here. So if we look at the photo as a whole, the first thing that I want to look at is the temperature of the image. How does it look, right? If we have a bluer tone, we're going to have that colder look. And if we bump it more towards that yellow tone, we're going to have a little bit of a warmer look. And this is all done right here in Lightroom underneath the main editing panel. And you are going to see that we can either add some coolness or we can add some warmth. Now, 5600, right? This is the Kelvin scale. 5600 is our daylight temperature. So having it a little bit warmer for photos that are, are being captured in a summer atmosphere or a warmer atmosphere would certainly be appropriate. But if we're capturing images maybe in an environment where it's pretty snowy, what you might want to look at adding a little bit of coolness to the photo, right? Because the temperature will then support the environment. And this is all going to go a long way and making some enhancements to your photo, but also keeping them believable. So when we look at this particular image, I'm going to take a look at maybe adding a little bit of warmth. And when we do have photos that support making it a little bit warmer, it's kind of good to know that when a viewer is looking at that image, they will be more attracted to a warmer image than a cooler image. So those are some of the things that we want to keep in mind. And we talked a lot about that in the last episode, right? Things we can do to grab our viewers' attention, make our subject a little brighter, add some vignettes to filter their eyes more towards the subject. All these little things that we're doing in this image are really focused on prioritizing our subject. And that is key in photography. So when we take a look at this, let's go over here. Again, no right or wrong answer here as far as, a specific Kelvin number, right? We're not looking we're not going to say it has to be 6,200 or 6,600. We're going to do it to taste again. So we have a little bit of warmth here because we're a little bit warmer than the average daylight of 5,600. But I still think that this image could benefit from just a little bit of warmth. So if we bump it up a little bit, you can see now that we are up into the 7,000 range. Now, you will find that when you're editing your photos, sometimes if you were to put a Kelvin of 7,000 on there, it's going to look ridiculously orange. It's just going to be way too much, right? So of course you would back that off. With this particular image though, it doesn't look too bad, but I still think I'm going to take it back just a little bit. And I think I'm going to take it down to around that 6,800 mark. And I like the way that looks right there. I think that has a nice orange glow to it, gives it just a little bit of warmth, makes the photo just a little bit richer. So after we're done with that cropping and masking tools, this is the first step that I'm going to take when reevaluating the image. The next thing that I want to take a look at is the exposure of the entire image, right? And now we talked about this in the last episode. We are not inside of the masking tool, right? We are not doing a local adjustment at this point. Everything that we are doing now are global adjustments. They're going to affect the entire image in its entirety. So let's take a look at the exposure. I think that we could benefit from adding a little bit of light to this. Now you're going to you might be looking at my histogram up here and go, but Jeff, everything is way over on the left side, right? So what we know about histograms is anything over here on the far left-hand side are the shadow areas of the photo, and anything over here to the right side are highlights. Now, a good rule of thumb when it comes to your histograms and exposures is you really don't want your histogram to be touching the far left side or the far right side, because what that means is that if it's to the far left side, like we have kind of here, that means we're going to be losing some detail in the shadow areas, and we can't bring that back. But if we have it over to the right side, going way up on the right side of the graph, that means we're going to be losing detail in the highlights, which will be super, super bright, really pure white, and we will lose detail in that area as well. So we're kind of looking to get that histogram off of those sides, but I'm not overly concerned about it with this particular photo. My histograms in wildlife photography tend to always favor the left-hand side because I don't mind losing a little bit of detail in those shadow areas. I'm okay with that, right? Again, these are just general rules, but rules are meant to be broken sometimes. And this is one case in which I'm okay with that. We're going for a darker, moodier image here. I'm okay with the histogram showing a little bit of a darker image, but still, I think we're going to bump up the overall exposure on the image just a little bit. And that's 0.45. I think that's just a little bright for me. I'm going to come back down here, and I'm going to keep it right there. I like it at 0.25. And that shifted the histogram ever so slightly, not a ton. You can still see that it's still on the darker side. But again, we do have a lot of darker tones in the image. So the histogram is naturally going to be favoring the left side to begin with. The only other thing that I typically really look at when we get into the brightness or the tone level of the image is I will bump up the exposure, and then I will also come back and just take a look at the highlights. Because sometimes when we increase that exposure, we're going to be increasing the brightness yet again on our subject. And if we come over here and just take down those highlights ever so slightly, if I go all the way to the left, you'll see how it's impacting the bird. So I might, if there's just a little too brightness, I might just bring those highlights down ever so slightly. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to go to -5 on the highlights. So after we do our mask, right, we worked really hard inside of the masking tools in Lightroom to get the exposure where we want it on the background and get the exposure where we want it on the bird. Then when we come out of the masking, it's just tweaking, fine-tuning the brightness of the image. So I do that again with exposure and highlights. And that's where I'm going to leave it as far as dealing with anything on exposure. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and I'm going to go to the presence part of the panel here. And what we can do here is we have texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. The first two that I want to look at are texture and clarity. So texture and clarity is a way to add a little bit more detail back into our image. But when we compare texture and clarity, there's a big difference between the two of them. Texture adds detail back into the image, but it does so in a much less aggressive way when compared to clarity. Clarity, on the other hand, when you bump up those sliders, you will see that it starts to turn into a really sharp and overly crispy looking image. And we'll take a look at what happens when we do this. So if we take a look at the texture slider and I go all the way up, let's just keep an eye here on the bird's feathers, right? You can see if I go all the way to the left, you see it soften. And if I go all the way to the right, you see them get a little bit sharper there, right? Let's take a look now. We'll double click that to zero it out. Then we will go to the clarity slider. Now, if I bring that down, really reduces it a lot. And if I go way up to the top, you can see we almost have a very HDR looking image, right? Where everything is super crisp and super sharp. So that is the difference between those two sliders. The last slider that we have here is the dehaze slider. Now, this is a great slider, especially for wildlife photographers. The dehaze slider can either serve to enhance some of the environmental conditions, or it can help to reduce some of the environmental conditions. So for instance, if you're out photographing wildlife on an early morning where maybe there's a little bit of fog or mist or haze in the atmosphere, the dehaze, if we go to the left, can help to enhance that a little bit, right? We can almost create a little bit of atmosphere, or again, enhance a little bit of atmosphere. And if we go to the right, you can see that we almost make it a little bit more contrasty, right? Almost sharpens the image a little bit by reducing some of the environmental effects of that haze and that fog. So this is a great tool to use when you do have those environmental conditions in your image. With this particular image, I'm not concerned about this at all, so I'm really not going to touch the dehaze slider. I probably use this slider on 10 to 20% of my images. Simply, again, all depends on what's going on environmentally, whether we have a little misty rain, a little fog, all of those types of things can really just be manipulated a little bit with that dehaze slider. That brings us down to the last two sliders under presence, and that is the vibrance and saturation. Now, we have talked a little bit about saturation in a past video, and I like to stay away from saturation, mainly because of the fact that it very easily can make your colors look unnatural and just ridiculous. You can take oranges and greens and they almost become nuclear or sci-fi looking. And so you have to use saturation, if you're going to use it, very sparingly, very cautiously. I like to use vibrance because it's very much like the texture and clarity sliders, right? Texture was a way to add some detail less aggressively. Well, that's how vibrance works. Vibrance adds some color to our image less aggressively. Clarity added that sharpness to the image, but again, went very aggressively when doing it. That's how saturation is. Saturation will add those colors, but it's much more aggressive. So you have to be very, very cautious. So what I will generally do with the majority of my images is I will take my texture up to somewhere between 20 to 25. And so I like that 22 to 23 range, just adding a little bit of detail back into the image. I then like to use the clarity slider, and I like to go at about half of what I did with the texture. So I'll bring this up between 10 and 15, and I'll keep it right at 13 for this particular case. And I like how that looks. We have nice detail in the bird. It's understated, right? We're not going over the top. We're not doing anything ridiculous here to make it super, super sharp or super, super unrealistic. And this looks natural and this looks good. So I'm going to leave that there. As I mentioned, we're not touching the dehaze slider on this image because there's really no environmental conditions that we have to be concerned about. We're not looking to enhance any or remove any. And then when we come down to vibrance, I like to have this somewhere right between 20 to 25, and I tend to keep it somewhere closer to 20 because I think it just adds the color a little bit more naturally. That is it. That is all I'm going to do with this particular image. Now, if we had some other characteristics in our photo, maybe we had some grass or some bushes or some trees, I might come down to the color mixer slider. And here we can just tweak some of the colors in our image. We can make them a little bit darker, a little bit brighter, a little bit greener, a little less green. So we can do different things with our colors. What I do want to point out, though, as far as the color mixer, is that if you do want to use this, we have 3 options that we can use. I'm going to click on all right now. You see we have hue, saturation, and we'll just zoom in here, hue, saturation, and luminance, and then we can view all of them. You can either click on the saturation, the luminance, or the hue, however you want to do it, but we'll click all just for the sake of looking at this. And the first one that we're going to look at is hue. And all I want you to take away from this particular segment of the video is that when we are talking about the hue of the colors in our images, we are talking about the color range, right? So we can either make something more green or less green, or change the hue of that green, right? So it might go from more of a brighter green to more of a yellowish by increasing and decreasing the greens. So if we look at this bird, it has some blues in it, right? If we move that slider, you can see that we can kind of go to the left and make some of those blues look a little bit more tealish, or we can shift some of those blues and make them a little bit more purplish. So that is what hue is going to do. It's just going to take those colors and it's going to move them and shift them into a slightly different color range. Then we have saturation, and we've talked about this quite a bit just a little while ago, and of course in one of the last videos. But this is going to increase or decrease the color. So if we look at blues here and we add this, we can reduce the saturation, which will just take the blues right out of the image, or we can increase it, and you can see when we go all the way up how ridiculous that looks, right? It really adds a lot of blue into the image. Now, of course, if we were really going to make this change, we could go down to somewhere around +10 or so. That just adds a little bit of blue, and I think even that looks a little unnatural for me. I would even bring it down a little further. But that is the point of what we can do with saturation, is we're going to really change the amount of color or reduce some of the color that's within our images. And then luminance is going to change the brightness of our color. So if we have blue in here like we do, if we move the blue slider all the way to the right, you can see that the head and the top shoulders of the bird get brighter, right? Because we're adding luminance, we're adding light. If we go to the left, we can bring that light value down in the blues. So that's all that is happening there. And again, as I move it to the right, you see it goes up. As I bring it to the left, you see the light value of the blues go down. So those are the 3 options that we have inside the color mixer. So you can work with your colors a little bit. If you're newer to photo editing, I urge you on all of these changes to use all of them with a little bit of caution. One of the biggest mistakes newer photo editors do is to overdo the edit, and that's how they start to look unnatural and unrealistic. So a good rule of thumb as a newer photo editor is any change you're making, reduce it by about 10 to 20%, and that will usually put you into a better range, a better area for your edits. So that is the color mixer. And again, that is something that I may tweak on my images if I had it. But with this particular image, there's really not a lot of colors going on. I like the color of the bird. They look natural. That's how they looked in real life. So I'm not going to mess with the color mixer. So that really takes care of everything that we're going to be doing in Lightroom. So we're going to come in, we're going to crop. We are then going to do our AI masking tool, where we're going to make our local adjustment edits to the background, to the subject. And don't forget, we're going to add that radial gradient to create that vignette in our photo. We're then going to come out of that and we're going to go to our global adjustments, where we're going to adjust the temperature. We're going to make a tweak to the exposure if we feel it's needed. And if we do that, we can look at using the highlight slider as well, just to kind of offset some of the brightness that we add into the photo and keep that lighting in the image looking realistic. Once we've done those little tweaks, we're going to come down to the presence. sliders where we are going to add some of that texture and clarity back into the image. Remember, texture is less aggressive, so we add a little bit more there. Clarity is more aggressive, so we want to be a little cautious there. We can use the dehaze slider if we're looking to increase our environmental conditions, or we can go to the right with it if we're looking to control them and reduce the effects of fog, mist, and those types of things. And then lastly, we're going to play with our vibrant slider by bumping that up to that 20 to 25 range just to add some color, enhance those colors in our image. So that's what we are going to do as the very final steps in Lightroom Classic. Now, what we're going to do in the next video is we are going to be jumping into Photoshop, and we are going to be taking a look at some of the tools that we might use when we have more complex edits. We're also going to be jumping ahead in some future videos and taking a look at Luminar Neo, where I kind of want to show how you can go through and do some sky replacements and use some of the other tools inside of Luminar Neo as well. But hey, what did you think about today's video? These are pretty simple edits. Pretty easy to get your photo going to that next level. Again, just be cautious with the amount you're using in your edits. But other than that, hopefully this works out really well for me. What do you think about this? Let me know in the show notes. If you thought this was helpful and useful, please consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this as we really talk about wildlife photography here. And we're going to be talking about image capturing and editing on this channel, help everyone grow and become better photographers. Other than that, guys, that is it. I look forward to seeing everyone in the next video. Until then, take care.